Throughout human history, countless empires have risen and fallen, leaving behind both dazzling achievements and costly lessons. Among them, the Khmer Empire is regarded by scholars as one of the greatest civilizations, once dominating most of mainland Southeast Asia from the 9th to the 15th century, and home to Angkor, the capital considered the largest in the pre-industrial world. The Khmer people harnessed the power of the monsoon, building a massive hydraulic system with canals and barrages, man-made reservoirs that sustained agriculture and fueled the prosperity of their cities. Yet here lies the paradox. A civilization that reached such heights of engineering and power suddenly collapsed. And to this day, the question remains, why did Angkor, the shining jewel of Southeast Asia, fall into ruin? It's a mystery that continues to puzzle generations of scholars. In 1586, Portuguese missionary Antonio de Madalena and his companions set foot in Cambodia. They trekked through hot, humid tropical forests, dense with vegetation, until suddenly a vast complex emerged from the endless green. At its center stood a majestic ancient temple, its stone carvings intricate, adorned with mysterious smiles, gazes that seemed to follow from every angle. Madalena described the structure as so extraordinary that it is impossible to capture in words, for it resembled nothing he had ever known. Soaring towers, perfectly symmetrical layouts, dense yet delicate patterns, a masterpiece of human hands. In the midst of the jungle, this awe-inspiring sight appeared. Angkor, the once radiant heart of the Khmer Empire. Yet not everyone today can truly imagine just how powerful the Khmer once were. They controlled the vital routes, plains, and highlands of the region. They mastered water and seasons, built monumental stone cities, and created an agricultural system on a scale never before seen in Southeast Asian history. And then one day, through shifts in climate, wars, disease, or perhaps the accumulated mistakes of generations of rulers, we still don't have a final answer. That brilliance slowly faded away. But in the heart of the forest, Angkor still stands, silent, magnificent, a profound reminder that every empire is born from choices and can also vanish because of those very same choices. At its peak, the Khmer Empire stretched across a vast region of mainland Southeast Asia, covering most of Thailand, Cambodia, and parts of Vietnam and Laos. At the center of this power stood Angkor, a city that archaeologists today describe as one of the rare pre-industrial megacities in human history. The scale of Angkor is almost unbelievable. Its urban agricultural landscape spanned around 3,000 square kilometers, with a farming system capable of sustaining at least 1 million inhabitants between the 11th and 13th centuries. This was a dazzling civilization, blending sophisticated urban planning with monumental hydraulic engineering. Massive barrage reservoirs, dense networks of canals, and grand stone temples and towers layered together like a self-contained ceremonial city. And yet, after some 600 years of prosperity, by the 15th century, Angkor was suddenly abandoned, and the Khmer Empire slowly slipped into decline. A civilization that once stood at the glorious heights of humanity had vanished in silence. What really happened? Let's turn back the clock to the 9th century. In the land we now call Cambodia, where Khmer communities, part of the Mon Khmer language family, had long been present in the lower Mekong Basin. The political landscape looked like a patchwork map, with many small states coexisting, trading, and competing for power. Ancient records mention a foreign force called Java. Some scholars believe this referred to the powerful Sailendra dynasty in Indonesia. Others highlight the influence of Champa in central Vietnam, which at the time controlled vital maritime trade networks. Amid this backdrop, the name Jayavarman II emerged as a turning point. According to ancient texts, he returned from Java and carried out a grand ritual to sever all ties with outside powers. In the year 802, atop Phnom Kulen, Jayavarman II solemnly proclaimed himself Chakravartin, universal monarch, king of kings, thereby asserting the independence and autonomy of a newly rising Khmer power. Some scholars suggest he may have once been held in Java as a political hostage, yet others disagree, pointing out that the inscriptions only mention his return from Java, with no reference to captivity. Despite these different interpretations, one thing is clear. From fragmented small states, Jayavarman II gathered the pieces into a unified entity, laying the foundation of the early Khmer state. From here, Angkor began to take shape and operate like a vast engine of power, built upon three pillars. 1. Sacred kingship with the Devaraja cult, god-king ritual, legitimizing the absolute authority of the monarch. 2. A strict system of taxation and corvée labor, enabling the king to mobilize immense human and material resources to construct temples and infrastructure. 3. Mastery of hydraulic engineering, turning monsoons and water into an advantage, controlling floods, storing water for the dry season, stabilizing rice production, and sustaining a rapidly growing population. All these elements came together to form a smoothly running engine of power that lasted for centuries. Yet over time, through wars, erratic climate, disease, or the accumulated mistakes of generations of rulers, the causes are still debated, the brilliance of Angkor quietly began to fade. Looking back, the story of the Khmer is not just one of rise and fall. It is also a profound lesson in how a society can turn religion, power, and hydraulic engineering into strength, and how it can lose everything if it fails to adapt in time. Based on these three pillars, we can trace the many theories that attempt to explain why one of the greatest ancient civilizations of Southeast Asia eventually collapsed. But before Angkor reached its golden peak, we must return to the very beginnings of the empire. From the start, Jayavarman II showed his resolve through fierce campaigns of conquest. His first uprising in the city of Indrapura brought him a resounding victory, paving the way for greater expansion. From there, he led his armies along the Mekong River, sweeping across the lower reaches of Southeast Asia. A rare inscription on an ancient stone stele records that Jayavarman II's victories came so swiftly, they seem miraculous. However, the more his power expanded, the stronger the resistance grew. To the west, many Khmer chieftains remained loyal to Champa and fought back fiercely. That pressure forced Jayavarman II to retreat several times before he gradually consolidated the foundation for a unified Khmer kingdom. Jayavarman II soon realized that military strength alone was not enough to unite the Khmer people. What they needed was not just another local warlord, but a supreme monarch who could bind them together under a common symbol. With that understanding, he declared himself king and performed a grand spiritual ritual rooted in Hinduism, known as the Devaraja. This ritual carried deep meaning. It separated the king from the mortal world, elevating him to the level of the gods, making him not just an earthly ruler, but a god-king. When the Khmer chieftains heard of this, their will to resist gradually dissolved. From then on, Jayavarman II step by step absorbed the scattered territories and unified the Khmer realm. After his conquests were complete, he established his first capital in a place called Hariharalaya, near today's Roluos area. The choice of location was rich in symbolism. In Hindu mythology, the gods reside in palaces atop high mountains, surrounded by a cosmic ocean of milk. By recreating the sacred imagery in the architecture of his palaces and temples, Jayavarman II further reinforced his absolute authority, binding Khmer kingship inseparably with divine power. It is clear that the early Khmer kingdom was founded upon Hinduism, a religion deeply imprinted on this land through trade and cultural influence from India. It was precisely this fusion of faith and political power that laid the groundwork for the long-lasting rise of Angkor. However, it was not Jayavarman II who brought the Khmer Empire to its peak, but a successor many generations later during its golden age, Suryavarman II, who reigned around 1113–1150. Under his rule, the Khmer Empire expanded its territory, controlling most of mainland Southeast Asia. The most iconic symbol of this prosperity is Angkor Wat, whose construction began in the early 12th century, around 1116 to 1150. Suryavarman II was both a formidable warrior king, enlarging the empire through conquest, and a patron of monumental architecture, leaving behind one of the world's greatest legacies. Yet this era of prosperity was also shadowed by war. Within roughly 30 years after his death, endless civil wars over succession, rebellions, and invasions from the Cham and other neighboring kingdoms severely weakened the Khmer Empire, pushing it to the brink of collapse. At that moment, a savior appeared, Prince Jayavarman VII, a name shared by several Khmer kings throughout history. But unlike his predecessors, this Jayavarman was different. He was a devout Buddhist, unlike the many Hindu kings who came before him. Historical records note that Jayavarman VII had originally been chosen as heir. When his father died in 1160, he was about 40 years old and ready to take the throne. However, his ascension was fiercely opposed by his elder brother. As a devoted Buddhist, Jayavarman VII refused to shed blood to claim power, especially against his own sibling. And so, he gave up the throne and chose to live in exile in Champa for many years. However, under his brother's rule, the Khmer Empire grew increasingly unstable due to a series of disastrous decisions. Rebellions broke out again and again, and one rebel leader, Tribhuvan Adityavarman, rose to challenge the throne. When Jayavarman VII heard that his brother was in danger, he rushed back to the kingdom. But it was too late. His brother had died, and the rebel leader had already seized power. Once more, Jayavarman's Buddhist faith forbade him from fighting for the throne through bloodshed, and he fled again into exile in Champa. During the 10-year reign of Tribhuvan Adityavarman, 1170–1181, the Khmer Empire remained in turmoil, with uprisings flaring across the land. Then in 1177, disaster struck. The Cham turned against the Khmer and launched a full-scale invasion. Believing that Angkor's fortified walls and grand temples would protect him, Tribhuvan Adityavarman chose to make a stand within the capital. But even the mightiest stone walls could not save the city. The Cham skillfully exploited the waterways, sailing down the Mekong River into Tonle Sap Lake, and then launching a sudden strike straight into the heart of Angkor. As he watched the Cham warships, their prows carved like dragon heads closing in on the capital, Tribhuvan Adityavarman knew it was over. He was captured alive and later executed. The Cham stormed into the capital, burning temples and palaces, leaving Angkor a smoldering ruin. By that time, Jayavarman VII was already in his 50s. When he heard that his homeland had fallen into ruin after the Cham invasion, he knew he had to return. Along the border, he saw with his own eyes the suffering of the Khmer people. Homes burned to the ground, citizens starving, and once glorious monuments reduced to rubble. In 1181, upon returning to Angkor, Jayavarman VII was welcomed by the people as a savior. He officially ascended the throne, taking the title Jayavarman VII, and immediately rallied an army to launch a counteroffensive against the Cham. Within just a few years, he not only repelled the invaders, but also marched south, striking deep into Champa's heartland. This time, he was no longer in exile, but a powerful Khmer king. He exacted revenge by capturing Champa's capital, deposing its king, and forcing Champa to become a vassal under Khmer control. At this point, the Khmer Empire was larger than ever, stretching across the breadth of Indochina. After these military triumphs, Jayavarman VII turned to rebuilding his kingdom. He reconstructed the capital and renamed it Angkor Thom. The new city was laid out in a nearly perfect square, about 9 square kilometers in area, each side almost 3 kilometers long, encircled by a moat 100 meters wide. Angkor Thom became a marvel of medieval urban planning and architecture, and he did not stop there. Jayavarman VII expanded the empire's infrastructure, building major roads that connected towns and settlements throughout the kingdom. This spurred population recovery and growth, ushering the Khmer Empire into a brilliant age of Renaissance, marking the final and greatest peak in Angkor's long history. Jayavarman VII was not only a victorious king on the battlefield, but also left a profound mark on religion and culture. He declared Mahayana Buddhism the state religion, beginning the transformation of Khmer society from its long-standing Hindu traditions to Buddhism. From this point on, temples gradually replaced the images of Vishnu and Shiva with depictions of the Buddha, and Buddhism quickly became the dominant faith in Khmer daily life. This shift marked a major turning point. The Khmer kingdom had originally been built on Hindu foundations, with royal power closely tied to divine authority. But when Jayavarman VII elevated Mahayana Buddhism, a faith centered on compassion and spiritual practice, the king's status changed as well. He was no longer seen as equal to the gods, like the Hindu kings before him, but rather as a mortal ruler, even if he still held supreme power in directing religious and architectural projects. Yet this change carried unforeseen consequences. After Jayavarman VII, the throne often passed to rulers of differing faiths, at times favoring Buddhism, at other times reverting to Hinduism. This created tension in belief. People began to question whether their king still carried the same sacred aura as before. At the same time, social inequality grew worse. Monumental Buddhist projects rose everywhere. Angkor Thom, Bayon, Taprom, Preah Khan, each demanding vast amounts of forced labor. Tens of thousands of farmers were conscripted into backbreaking work, while kings, nobles, and the priestly elite lived in luxury within magnificent temples and palaces. Some estimates suggest that building the West Baray, the colossal water reservoir, required hundreds of thousands of laborers. These crushing burdens meant that beneath its dazzling surface, Khmer society carried deep and widening cracks. The abuse of religious authority and forced labor during Jayavarman VII's reign unintentionally paved the way for Theravada Buddhism to win the hearts of the people. Unlike the grandeur of Mahayana, tied to lavish monuments and extravagant rituals, Theravada emphasized a humble lifestyle close to ordinary life. Monks walked barefoot on pilgrimages, living in simple thatched huts instead of resplendent palaces. This very simplicity allowed Theravada to spread, gradually becoming a serious challenge to the foundations of Khmer kingship. By 1295, about 70 years after Jayavarman VII's death in 1218, Theravada Buddhism, with its belief that the king is only human, had deeply penetrated Khmer society, shaping the religious identity of Cambodia for centuries to come. For the ruling class, however, this was a political disaster. The weakening of divine authority stripped the monarchy of its spiritual foundation to uphold social order. The people still mourn Jayavarman VII, the last king strong enough to lift the Khmer Empire to its greatest heights. But after his passing, the empire quickly spiraled into decline. Religious monuments were left unfinished, construction projects ground to a halt. From the 13th into the 14th century, the carving of inscriptions on stone steles, once a vital record-keeping tradition, also disappeared. Palm leaf manuscripts, fragile and short-lived, could not survive the centuries, leaving only scant traces of this period for posterity. The last clearly recorded monarch was Jayavarman IX, 1327-1336. After him, Khmer history fell into a void of nearly 2 centuries, with no surviving records of kings or dynasties. This era is known as Cambodia's Dark Ages. The stark contrast between the royal family's luxurious lifestyle and the austere existence of Theravada monks, combined with the collapse of the idea of divine kingship, shook the very foundations of the Khmer kingdom, opening the way for foreign powers to gradually dominate. In the minds of the Khmer people, the memory of past glory still lingered, but in reality their neighbors were growing ever stronger. Dai Viet to the east and the Siamese, the Ayutthaya kingdom, to the west began exerting heavy pressure on the Khmer Empire. In 1350, Ayutthaya was founded and quickly rose into a powerful force, confident enough to challenge the major states of the region. Over the next century, 1350 to 1450, wars between Siam and the Khmer flared again and again. The Khmer gradually lost territory, their military and political strength waning until they could do little more than hold a defensive stance. From the 14th century onward, Siamese armies began directly attacking Angkor itself, the capital in western Cambodia. In the past, threats from the east, whether from Dai Viet or Champa, could still be repelled thanks to distance and terrain. But against invasions from the west, Angkor found itself vulnerable, easily surrounded and besieged. Some historians suggest that the vast road network built under Jayavarman VII, originally designed to promote trade, link towns, and strengthen royal administration, ironically became an advantage for the enemy. These very roads allowed Siamese forces to move swiftly, paving the way for direct assaults on the heart of the Khmer Empire. In the end, the Khmer defenses could not stop the advance of Siam. Siamese forces stormed into Angkor, overthrew the king, and for a short time even installed a puppet ruler to govern. Yet the proud and unyielding Khmer refused to submit. Repeated uprisings broke out, making it impossible for Siam to fully control the land. The climax came in 1431 when Siam launched a siege that lasted 7 months, cutting off all food and water supplies to the capital. At last, Angkor fell. The invaders poured into the city, looted its treasures, and carried off thousands of Khmer artisans, scholars, and craftsmen to Ayutthaya to serve the rising kingdom. Even so, Angkor never became a Siamese capital. It remained only as a ruined symbol in the Khmer memory. Under King Ponhayat, R. 1431-1463, the Khmer court withdrew southward, choosing Phnom Penh as its new political center. From then on, Angkor was left to the jungle, its grand temples cloaked in moss, tended only by a few monks and scattered villagers. The fall of 1431 is seen as the final marker of Angkor's greatness, the end of its mighty age, and the beginning of a long period of silence in Cambodian history as its once glorious past slowly faded beneath the dust of time. And yet one big question remains. Why did a mighty capital like Angkor decline and end up abandoned in the jungle? If we say the cause was only war, conflict, or foreign invasion, that may not be the full answer. Many modern scholars believe that the real mystery behind Angkor's decline and the disappearance of tens of thousands of its people is tied to the very factor that once made it great: water. The Khmer were masters of hydraulic engineering, building massive reservoirs, canals, and water control systems, the foundation that sustained their population and fueled large-scale agriculture. But archaeological and hydrological studies suggest that Angkor may have begun to weaken even before the Great Wars, when this vast hydraulic system started losing its effectiveness. Prolonged floods, severe droughts, and the overuse of farmland turned water, the pillar of Angkor, into a burden, pushing the kingdom into a slow but relentless crisis. In 1999, Associate Professor Daniel Penny made an important discovery. The growth rings of ancient trees revealed clear evidence of the climate shifts that once struck Angkor. According to him, during the 14th century, the region went through a devastating drought, followed by seasons of violent monsoon storms, and then another stretch of prolonged drought. It was this extreme alternation of drought and flooding, combined with a lack of maintenance, that threw the Khmer's massive hydraulic system out of balance and caused it to collapse. Penny emphasized that the problem was not simply drought or flooding on their own, but the chain of erratic climate swings that pushed Angkor to the brink of ruin. From the very beginning, water had been the lifeblood of Angkor and the key to its growth. It was truly a hydraulic city, tied closely to the Mekong River. This river not only brought fertile silt to grow rice, but also provided abundant fisheries to sustain hundreds of thousands of people. Most importantly, the Tonle Sap Lake was the ecological heart of the Khmer Empire. For most of the year, the lake received water from the Mekong, but during the southwest monsoon, beginning in June, the Mekong swelled and reversed its flow into Tonle Sap, turning the lake into a vast inland sea. At its peak, the water level could rise more than a meter, swelling to 10 times its dry season volume. This natural wonder fueled Khmer agriculture and prosperity, but it also laid the foundation for fragility when the climate became unstable. Today, around the shores of Tonle Sap, stilt houses still rise high above the ground, a living testament to how local communities have adapted for centuries to the rhythm of rising and falling waters. As far back as ancient times, a Chinese traveler recorded that the lake's waters could swell so high they submerged even large trees, forcing families along the shore to retreat to higher ground. Yet this flooding also brought enormous benefits. Fertile silt enriched the fields, ensuring abundant harvests of rice and crops. The Khmer people were deeply familiar with this natural rhythm, and it was precisely this knowledge that made them the region's true masters of water. They dug canals and built reservoirs to store water, control floods, and sustain large-scale agriculture. By the 12th century, when monumental works like Angkor Wat were being built, the Khmer hydraulic system had reached its zenith. Vast canals carried water from all directions back into Tonle Sap, sustaining the wealth and vitality of the city. But by the 13th and 14th centuries, as the climate grew more unpredictable and maintenance fell behind, this very vast network became a fatal weakness. Sediment clogged canals, waterways silted up, and extreme climate shifts left the system unable to function as before, a breakdown that helped push Angkor toward decline. Associate Professor Daniel Penny observed, "This is not just an urban story, nor simply an environmental one, but a blend of both." The climatic shifts of that era sent ripples far beyond Southeast Asia. In Europe, rivers and lakes froze and harvests failed. In Southeast Asia, the once stable pattern of dry and wet seasons, the very foundation of Khmer agrarian society, turned erratic, shaking the empire to its core. In the early 14th century, Angkor faced a series of extreme climate shocks. First came prolonged droughts, leaving crops ruined and irrigation canals dry. Then the climate flipped, bringing years of erratic monsoon rains that unleashed widespread flooding. Even the massive hydraulic infrastructure could no longer keep up with nature's escalating extremes. The Khmer economy had always rested on its rice paddies, the lifeline that fed hundreds of thousands of people. As yields declined, farmers were forced to expand cultivation. They cleared the forest to make way for more farmland, but in doing so, they unwittingly stripped away nature's protective shield. When heavy rains poured down, fertile soil and sediments that the forest once held back were now washed away in torrents, rushing into the barrages, the reservoirs, and the canal network. The result was disastrous. Canals clogged, dikes repeatedly broke, and the entire water management system fell into crisis. Khmer farmers found themselves trapped in a vicious cycle, suffering from drought at one moment, drowning in floods the next, gradually losing faith in the very agricultural system that had once carried Angkor to greatness. Daniel Penny's research also uncovered striking evidence of Angkor's decline. He found that the Angkor Thom Bridge had been built from stones reused from older temples, many still bearing intricate carvings. The dismantling of sacred religious monuments to construct what was essentially just a civil structure was a clear signal that society was sliding into crisis. Some scholars suggest that in Angkor's final years, massive amounts of silt built up in the barays, the reservoirs, and canals, leaving them unable to function as intended. The result was repeated crop failures, food shortages, and a collapse of agriculture. When the barays were no longer dredged, the vicious cycle deepened. Poor harvests, natural disasters, social exhaustion, and the gradual erosion of faith in the royal court. Penny also noted that, over time, the Khmer elite began abandoning Angkor, perhaps drawn instead to the emerging trade centers along the Mekong Delta, where life and commerce were more sustainable. The Khmer Empire, once one of Asia's greatest civilizations, was by then only a shadow of its former self. Historical records from this period of collapse are almost non-existent. What remains are archaeological traces, fragments of folklore, and the interpretations of scholars. Yet it is precisely this mysterious silence that continues to drive researchers to seek answers, to fully confront the great question: why did Angkor, the shining jewel of Southeast Asia, fall into quiet ruin? The fall of Angkor was not just the closing of a chapter in history, but a mirror reflecting the fate of all empires. The silent stone walls hidden in the jungle tell us this truth. Power, monuments, glory, all will fade if humanity cannot live in harmony with nature. Standing before the ancient ruins, we feel not only the sorrow of a radiant past, but also a faint reflection of our own present. And in that moment, Angkor speaks as a reminder. Every glory is fragile if we forget how to preserve balance with the world around us. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and join us as we uncover more forgotten histories of our world.